Hello and welcome to the PMC podcast, where PMC stands for Project Management Conversations. Now, there are so many professionals out there that prepare for the PMP exam, and some pass, but some don't, and some even give up the idea considering how much effort it is going to take. Even on our real life projects, there is a possibility that the project you're working on it doesn't achieve its objectives, its goal, and it might even be called a failure. Now, how do you survive and thrive despite this failure? I believe this is a topic that all of us should pay attention to. And that is why I have with me Andy here, who comes with a wealth of knowledge. And he recently wrote an article around this. Andy is an instructor, writer, speaker, and a mentor in key areas like project management, PMOs, strategic leadership, among others. Thanks for taking the time out, Andy. And it would be great if you could start by sharing a bit about your career and professional experience so far.
Absolutely. Thank you for letting me be part of this show. My background is really accidental project management originally. I started work in banking in England and spent a few years working for a high street bank, like a main customer consumer bank. And then went to London to work for a very exclusive private bank, one of these places where they go, certainly I'll lend you £1 million, sir. How much interest would you like to pay? And they sort of said, well, we're going to teach you how to do banking properly so that you can forget everything that you've learned so far. And this is the real way of doing it. So they put me on a program that went through all the different areas of the business. And I happened to be in the investment area at a time when a major project was going on to basically get rid of paper share certificates and make everything electronic. And the person who was leading the project got fired. And I guess I was the slowest runner. So they said, you can do it, you can take over. So with absolutely no understanding of what the heck project management was and needing a dictionary to spell the word project, I was suddenly a project manager on a business critical project. So that was a little bit of fun and games, but then I found I loved it and I enjoyed it. And I guess I was reasonably good at it. So from there, I moved to Canada, did some project management, had a chance just after Y2K to launch a PMO with the first PMO for the software company I was working for at the time. So some colleagues and I sort of figured that out, found that was even better than managing projects. And then sort of did that for a few companies, went into consulting on PMOs, made a lot of money for a consulting firm and thought, maybe I should keep some of this money for myself. So for the last 15 years, I've been an independent consultant, initially on PMOs, but then sort of broadening that into my background in project management, portfolio management, and now a lot of focus on strategic transformation and execution, which sort of ties into that whole strategic portfolio management concept. So that's me.
Awesome, awesome. Love that intro. Thanks for taking us through your actually the career timeline itself. All right, so let's start off with maybe a personal experience of sorts. Have you ever faced a significant project setback, and how were the emotions you went through at that time?
It was, have I ever had a setback? Yes. Now, which of the thousands should we choose? That first project, the whole point of it was that we were supposed to take this piece of software that we used in the bank and connect into the network that the city was using and test it and make sure everything worked. And on that first day, when the software company was telling everything was going to be awesome and everything else, and this was the mid-90s, so we didn't exactly have fast internet. It took us 4 hours just to log into the system, which clearly wasn't that good. And at the end of the day, I had to go and meet with the executives of the bank and tell them what was going on. That wasn't a particularly fun meeting. And it turned out that it was none of our fault. It wasn't the software company's fault. It was a problem at the networking. But you feel like a failure. You feel completely demoralized. You feel like everything you've done was for nothing. And then you have to go and stand up in front of the executives and tell them that you're a miserable failure. And then you have to go back to your team and try and convince them that despite how you're feeling, they're doing everything right, that they're not failures, that they need to forget this, go home, get a good night's sleep, and come back and start again tomorrow, and everything will be wonderful, unicorns and rainbows. And it's fundamental to being a project manager, but it is unfathomably difficult to achieve. It really is.
Totally, totally. How do you develop a perspective that allows you to view setbacks, like the setback that you just mentioned, as maybe an opportunity for growth, right? Especially in challenging situations like the one that you just mentioned, project failures.
Time helps. It's easy to look back on things, when you find out it really isn't the end of the world and there is life after a project failure. That certainly helps. But you don't want to have to wait 10 years to learn a lesson, right? You want to be able to learn pretty much straight away. But I think that it's critical that you separate the ability to learn from the raw emotion. When something happens, whether it's a job loss, I've been through a company bankruptcy, whether or not it's a project failure of the entire project or one aspect or whatever it is, emotionally as humans, forget whether you're a project manager or anything else, as human beings, it takes a toll. We're not ready to process that logically and mentally until we've processed the emotions of the way it makes us feel. So we need to recognize in ourselves that we're going through that emotional turmoil, that frustration, that anger, whatever it might be. Once we've done that, once we've got that emotion out of the system, and it takes time, some people can do it in an hour or a day, some people will take a week or a month, and that's okay. Everybody's different. But once you've achieved that, then it's important to go back and say, okay, now what really happened? Let's not look at this with the I'm a miserable failure or the world's against me attitude. Let's look at this objectively and say, all right, where could I have done something differently? And as PMs, it's important to recognize that there's always a few things you could have done differently that might have made things slightly better. But never, I was going to say very rarely, but never is a project failure solely the fault of the PM. And it's important to recognize that.
Awesome. Awesome. Love that answer. One of the things that I also noticed was, uh, downplaying this whole thing, downplaying the failure, right? And some project managers do fall in that trap that, oh, it's not a big deal, we'll fix it 3 months down the line or whatever, right? Uh, what challenges can arise if you downplay a failure?
If you downplay a failure, you're lying for a start.
Yeah.
It does matter, right? Don't pretend it's no big deal. Don't put it on the bravado and go, oh, this is fine. It's no different than looking at a project that's got problems and telling your stakeholders that it's green. You're lying. Most of all, you're lying to yourself, which is, the worst defense of all. But the impact is on other people. You're not the only one who knows that something has gone wrong. The entire team, the entire stakeholder community knows that something has gone wrong. Whether or not the entire project is a steaming pile in the corner, or whether or not it's just one little thing, something's gone wrong and people know that. If you make out that, it doesn't matter, it's no big deal, it'll be fine, you're showing a disconnect with reality. And your team will lose faith in you because you're not reflecting what's really happening. And your stakeholders will start to question whether you are the right person to lead the initiative. And that's a slippery slope. I've seen a lot of project managers who think it's the right thing to do, be strong for the team. But if that gets to the point where you're denying reality, what you're really saying is, I'm not a very good project manager.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one thing that stems from this is because this is more like uh, a quick reaction, right? If something fails, some people have this habit of, oh, it's okay, it's nothing, we'll figure it out. Let's see. Uh, at that, at that instant when something goes wrong, how do you recommend project managers to navigate and manage their this emotional reactions, right? The initial one, the quick reaction that you tend to get when something goes wrong.
Words matter, right? You need to be there for your team. You need to be there to support them, to uplift them, to help them to keep a perspective and to help them to look forward. Because when something goes wrong, you need that team to be able to collaborate together, to problem solve, to understand the challenge that's happening, come up with options and solutions so that we can move forward. But words matter. If you start by saying it's no big deal, it doesn't matter, then one of two things is going to happen. Either the team's going to go, this guy doesn't get it, or they're going to go, well, if it doesn't matter, if it's no big deal, what's all the fuss about having to stay late to find some solutions? Why are we being asked to drop everything else and suddenly work on this? Clearly something does matter, or the PM's asking us to do the wrong thing.
Mm.
If, on the other hand, you say, okay, that wasn't what we wanted to happen, that wasn't what should have happened, something's gone wrong. Let's put that in perspective. It's not the end of the world, but it's something we're going to have to work on. So what I'd like us to do is put this piece of work on hold. Let's focus on understanding this a little bit more. Let's look for solutions. Let's regroup this time tomorrow or at the end of the day or at the end of the week, whatever it is, see where we're at. If you've got any questions, if anything doesn't make sense, let me know. I'm going to stop by every couple of hours just to see how things are going. I'm also going to go and talk to the stakeholders. I'm going to update the sponsor on what's happening. I'm going to give the customer a heads up. I'll let you know if anything comes from that. That's a PM who's in control, who's looking forward, who's supporting the team, giving them a course of action to help them go forward, but isn't suggesting it doesn't matter and isn't suggesting it's the end of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Not downplaying it, at the same time, not even exaggerating.
Right,
Uh,
perspective.
One thing that you mentioned in the article was the importance of conducting RCAs, root cause analysis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, can you share maybe a practical example of how you've approached this process in the aftermath of, let's say, a project failure?
It's something that I think project managers should do. It's
Mhm.
probably a personal thing. Maybe you can have a conversation with a sponsor or a stakeholder or a colleague if you trust them enough. It's probably a personal thing. It's something that I always try and do, whether or not it's a major failure or a minor one. I'm not going to pretend I sit down with an Ishikawa diagram or fishbone diagram and start drawing it out. But in my head, I'm starting thinking, okay, where was the first indication that something was going wrong? Did I react appropriately? Did I recognize that that was a warning sign that needed something? And if I didn't, why didn't I? What was it that made me think I didn't have to think about that more? I didn't have to worry about that. Or I didn't have to do anything. Or the reverse, why did I do this when with hindsight something else was different? And sometimes it's perfectly okay to go, you know what, there's nothing I could have done. Sometimes that happens. I worked for a company that went bankrupt. I didn't lose all the money. It wasn't my fault, right? Sometimes these things happen. But sometimes, especially in project management, because you're making so many minor decisions that have impacts that you can't possibly recognize, there is an ability to say, okay, if I'd seen that in a different light, if I'd looked at that slightly differently, I might have behaved differently. I might have got someone working on it or looking into it a little bit more, and we could have identified the potential problem a little bit earlier before it snowballed into something bigger. That doesn't prevent you from making mistakes in the future, but it does two things. One, it stops you making the same mistake, hopefully, but it also makes you a little bit more cautious as a PM. And I don't want a PM who's fearful of making decisions or fearful of taking action, but I do want a PM who is cautious and is willing to say, okay, this thing's happened. There's a 99% chance that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to spend a little bit of time looking into that 1% because if that 1% happens, it could be real bad real quick.
Right.
So that's really what I think that root cause analysis is about, is understanding what, where, when, how, why for your own actions to a situation so that you can learn and grow from it next time around.
Yeah. One thing that was ringing in my mind, especially in the later half of your answer, was lessons learned, So you do learn a lot of lessons when you do these RCAs, when you document stuff and all. And maybe later on in future projects, you might want to do some maybe behavioral adjustments or process improvements or whatever, right? Uh, has there been any such examples that stand out for you in your career that, changes like these, maybe one or two changes, whatever that stands out to you that maybe you have incorporated and it positively impact your approach to project management?
Project management is a people discipline. more so now than ever. When I first started managing projects, we had to do a lot of the hard skills and building plans and estimates and all that kind of stuff. Software does all that now. Yes, we still need to provide input, but software does all that, right? It's easy these days. Project management now is really project leadership. It's about interacting with people. And you have to become a better leader with every interaction, every communication, every conversation, every project, whatever it is. I remember when I was first managing projects, I used to assume that everybody had the same motivation as me. We've been assigned to this. We want to make this work. We're going to do everything it takes. And somebody took me aside and said, I'm not ambitious like you are.
Yeah.
I don't want to get that next promotion. I'm quite happy just sitting here doing my job. Chill out.
Right.
Don't push people so hard because you're going to alienate as many as you motivate. And that was a real light bulb moment. You know what? The golden rule says treat people the way that you want to be treated. That's wrong. It's the platinum rule that's important. Treat people the way they want to be treated. And when you understand that and adjust that, it makes life so much easier. That was one of my first most significant interpersonal failures, if you like. And you learn from it. You still make mistakes, but you make different mistakes and hopefully smaller mistakes as you grow.
Love that example. So maybe towards the end, in conclusion, Andy, what would be your top piece of advice for project managers to maybe embrace these setbacks that may appear, that may happen, and take them as opportunities for growth in their professional journey?
The cliche says you learn more from your failures than your successes, right? But it's a cliche for a reason. It's true. You do. But you only learn from your failures if you allow yourself to learn. To do that, you've got to process the emotions, but then you've got to understand why, what happened, how did it happen, what can I do differently, and grow from it. It's never as bad as you think it is the second, the hour, the day that it happens. Mm. But to understand how you can leverage it to become better, you've got to process those emotions and then objectively learn from it. If you do that as a PM, every single failure will be a stepping stone to success.
Wow, that's strong words there. So, Andy, how can someone contact you if they want to?
Easiest way to contact me, if you're on projectmanagement.com, if you're a PMI member, you have access to projectmanagement.com. Connect with me there. My email address is also on my profile page there, or you follow me on LinkedIn. I don't connect with people I don't know directly, but you're welcome to follow me on LinkedIn and take a look at the courses and that there.
Love that. Thanks for taking the time out today, Andy. I'm sure our community will find this podcast very helpful.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Shah. Thanks for letting me join.